Hello, everybody. Welcome to another edition of Charts with Dan. We are once again on a Monday, which happens a lot in the summer movie season because tomorrow morning you will get my review of Minions and Monsters. I'm excited for that one. But there is plenty of box office news to talk about this week, including the second week of Toy Story 5, but really let's not sugarcoat it, very poor performance of Supergirl at the box office this weekend. We're going to take a deep dive on that as well as the other stories. So let's jump right into it and look at the weekend top 10. Of course, Toy Story 5, the number one movie for a second consecutive week, a 56.2% drop based on the estimates and a $70 million total. Its domestic total now close to $300 million going into the Independence Day weekend. It's going to add a lot more money over the next week or so. In second place, a distant second place, was Supergirl. The estimates dropped all weekend. Warner Brothers says it made $38 million. I think it's going to come in lower than that. If I had to guess, it is really right now just above Joker Folie à Deux, and I think that maybe WB didn't want headlines of Supergirl opening below that movie, but we'll see what the actual number is. It's going to be around that, just a not good performance for that film. And like I said, we are going to jump into that much more in just a few minutes. In third place, Obsession, in its seventh week of release, putting up, as is usual, like the 25% drop-off has just become every weekend now. It made another $9.8 million for a $233.9 million domestic total, and we got a couple interesting things to say about that movie. In fourth place was Jackass Best and Last, which was a combination clip show / a few new stunts, the last Jackass movie. It made $8.4 million. Probably my least favorite of the Jackass movies, but it was nice to see them all together. Jackass was big for me. It came out when I was in high school, and it was just fun to see that movie. Disclosure Day rounds out the top five. It dropped 54.2%, so still not really strong legs for a movie appealing to an older audience. It made $8.1 million. Its domestic total, though, is getting close to $100 million. Backrooms is in sixth place. It dropped 39.8% for a $4.3 million weekend. Its domestic total now getting close to $185 million. Scary Movie made $3 million, but did get over the $100 million mark. Right now, tied with Scary Movie is Bleach, 1,000-Year Blood War, The Calamity, which is a theatrical event featuring the first 3 episodes of the final season of the Bleach 1,000-Year Blood War series, which airs this year. So much like we saw with Demon Slayer, putting a few episodes in theaters, get the fans excited. In ninth place was Masters of the Universe, another 64% drop for a $2.2 million weekend. It's made $61.9 million domestically. One of the more disappointing financial performances of the summer. Speaking of, Star Wars The Mandalorian and Grogu dropped 61.7% to make $1.6 million. So I think both of those movies are probably in their last weeks in the top 10. We'll see what happens next week. It's made $175.2 million, so more than Masters of the Universe, but still not a fantastic performance. Dropping out of the top 10, we had a spring release, Michael, out after 9 weeks, but an incredible box office run that's still ongoing. It's trying to get to that $1 billion mark slowly but surely worldwide. It's out of the top 10 domestically, but an incredible performance for that film, lasting deep into the summer. Leviticus, which I did a spoiler review of here on the channel, is out of the top 10 after 1 week. That's not unexpected given the fact that it didn't have a huge opening, a very small neon horror film last week. And The Death of Robin Hood, which is from A24, also out of the top 10 after 1 week. Movies like that, it's tough to stay in the top 10. They can't all be Obsession and Backrooms. Some of the smaller movies just kind of have a weekend and then they fade away. Looking at the biggest theater count changes for this past weekend, Star Wars, The Mandalorian, and Grogu lost 750 theaters. It's still in 1,250. Michael lost about half of its theaters. It lost 723, but it's still in 711. Scary Movie lost 721 theaters. It's in just over 2,000. The Furious lost 577 theaters. It's still in 293. And Stop That Train lost most of its theaters, 550 of them. It's still in 114. This is what this past box office weekend looked like versus the same weekend last year, and you can see that we were up about 20% over the same weekend in 2025, which saw the release of F1, the movie. So even though Supergirl didn't do great this weekend, we were still up over where we were this time last year, and we're going to look at how June did overall and where we are with the cumulative box office and the market share for each studio in just a little bit. Let's check in on the summer box office. We have a new number one movie, which is Toy Story 5 at $297.2 million. The second place movie, though, is Obsession at $233.9 million. But as we talked about on the show last week, Obsession was actually the number one movie of the summer for a couple of days during the week. I made sure to take a screenshot before it was passed by Toy Story 5 on Tuesday and Wednesday. Obsession was number one. Toy Story overtook it on Thursday, but still pretty incredible for a movie that small to be leading all other summer movies as we headed into the end of June, and really to be overtaken by a big Pixar movie. That's nothing to be ashamed of. But yeah, 2 glorious days at number one for Obsession. Looking at the rest of the summer top 10, The Devil Wears Prada 2 is down 2 spots. It's now the third highest grossing film of the summer. Backrooms is at 4. The Mandalorian is in 5th place. Scary Movie is in 6th place. Disclosure Day moves up 1 spot to become the 7th highest grossing film of the summer, which bumps Mortal Kombat 2 down to number 8. The Sheep Detectives and Masters of the Universe round out the top 10 at number 9 and 10. And looking at my predictions for this summer, I did predict that Toy Story 5 would be the number one film of the summer. That's where it sits currently. But we'll see what happens with Spider-Man Brand New Day. I think it could very well get bumped down into the number 2 spot. I now have 6 of my 10 picks, which are in theaters. I picked The Devil Wears Prada 2 at number 6 and The Mandalorian and Grogu at number 7. I'm pretty confident that those two are both going to stick in the summer top 10. But that number 8, 9, 10 is pretty scary. Supergirl, I have not officially eliminated yet, but probably as early as next week, I can turn that one red. It is not going to be a top 10 summer movie. And depending on how a lot of other films do this summer, Scary Movie and Disclosure Day may not make the cut either. We have a lot of summer left to go. So I'm looking at least 9 out of 10 correct, probably 8 out of 10, maybe even 7 out of 10. We'll see how things play out. But that's the fun part of the summer. You make these predictions and then you see what actually happens. As you can see, July is a big month for me. The remaining 4 picks for me, Minions and Monsters, The Odyssey, Moana, and Spider-Man Brand New Day are all July openers. So I need these July movies to do well at the box office, at least to salvage my top 10. Supergirl did not have one of the 10 best opening weekends of the year, but Toy Story 5 did have one of the 10 best overall weekends of the year, whether it was opening weekend or not. As you can see here, it has the best performance for any movie this year so far with its $159.6 million opening, and its second weekend was the 8th best performance based on estimates that we've seen for a movie this year, ahead of the second week of the Super Mario Galaxy movie, as well as the opening of Scream 7. So right now, Toy Story 5 and the Super Mario Galaxy movie are the only 2026 releases that have multiple weekends as far as the best performances for any movie this year. And while we're talking about Toy Story 5, let's take a look at my franchise tracker for Pixar. Toy Story 5 has vaulted up to become the 8th highest grossing domestic release in Pixar history, unadjusted for inflation. It has passed movies like Monsters, Inc. and Up, and it is probably going to pass Inside Out over this next week or so. It's going to get close to Finding Nemo, and pretty soon it'll be entering that $400 million territory, which is where Toy Story 3 and Toy Story 4 are currently sitting. But let's look at it when you do adjust those box office numbers for inflation, and Toy Story 5 is a little bit deeper down the list. It is the 19th highest grossing Pixar film. It's already outgrossed, adjusted for inflation, movies like Cars 2, Coco, Cars 3, and then of course some of your lower grossing Pixar films, your Good Dinosaurs, your Light Years, etc. And about $50 million from now, it's going to pass Ratatouille. Brave is in its sights. WALL-E is in its sights. And once it gets into that $400 million territory, it'll be with movies like Monsters University and the first Toy Story, adjusted for inflation. And this is going to be an interesting chart to see just how high up can it get into that top 10 as far as Pixar movies adjusted for inflation, up there where The Incredibles is. We'll see what happens over the next several weeks. And let's also turn to the results of our member poll from last week. I asked members here on the channel, given Toy Story 5's critical success, the fact that audiences liked it, it was a box office success, I asked the members, should there be a Toy Story 6? 37% said yes. 63% said, I don't care how well it did. I don't think that there should be a 6th film. Honestly, I mean, I never know how these polls are going to go, but I'm kind of surprised that we had really better than 1 out of 3 say yes. And I think that if the movie had not done well or was not very well received, there would be a lot fewer yes votes. But it looks like, even though some people really don't think that there should be Toy Story movies past number 3, that a Toy Story 6 is a good idea. 37% of you will be in line in, let's say, 2033. All right, so let's take a deep dive on Supergirl, which was not one of the great opening weekends in DC history. And we're going to start with our Charts with Dan trivia question for this week. Supergirl was not a number one opener, and I wanted to know, not counting the Swamp Thing movies, which are kind of their own things, how many live-action theatrical releases based on DC Comics characters have not opened at number one domestically? So these are DC movies, not the imprint films like your Reds or your V for Vendettas. These are movies based on DC Comics characters, heroes, etc. How many did not open theatrically at number one? I'll give you a second to total those up. If you want to take another minute, you can pause, but I'm going to give you the answer right now. The answer is 6. We had Supergirl, as well as Jonah Hex, Constantine, Catwoman, Steel, and Superman 4, The Quest for Peace. And with the possible exception of Constantine, that is not great company to be in if you're looking at the DC history books as far as live-action movies. And let's actually take a look at all DC live-action films, which by my criteria, I counted 39 of them. As far as their 3-day opening weekend grosses, you can see that Supergirl right now is at number 23, and if it dips below $37.6 million, it'll actually open below Joker Folie à Deux, which was, of course, a box office disaster. So Supergirl actually made about $4.7 million less than 1989's Batman did, unadjusted for inflation, which is, again, not great considering that we're talking about a movie that came out when I was 6 years old. And here I am at 43 talking about a movie making less than that. It does come in ahead of movies like Birds of Prey, Shazam, Fury of the Gods, Aquaman and the Last Kingdom, Blue Beetle. But a few of those films, especially when you look at like Fury of the Gods and the second Aquaman movie and Blue Beetle, those were sort of the last dying breaths of the DCEU. So I don't think you really want a new movie. It's something that's supposed to be building the DCU even on the same level as those films. And it gets a lot worse when you adjust for inflation. When you adjust for inflation, Supergirl comes in at number 29, just below actually 1978 Superman, one of the rare movies pre-1982 that we have opening weekend numbers for. So 1978 Superman actually, at least as far as estimates go, made a little bit more than 2026's Supergirl, the difference being that back in 1978, Superman opened in 508 theaters, whereas Supergirl opened in 3,602. So even with the differences in exhibition and all of that, when you put inflation into account, a movie that came out almost 50 years ago performed better, again, according to inflation and estimates, than Supergirl did. It comes in just ahead of Shazam, Fury of the Gods. It comes in ahead of The Suicide Squad. That was a streaming day-and-date release. Still ahead of Catwoman and Blue Beetle, but not a whole lot of DC All-Stars on this list, and far behind movies like The Flash and Black Adam and Green Lantern, which were not successes. Of course, movies like The Dark Knight and The Dark Knight Rises are up there at the top. Batman v Superman, even though it fell off hard after its first weekend, was still the third best opening in DC history. Man of Steel is up there in the top 5. And then looking into the top 10, I mean, last year's Superman still in the top 10, there at number 8. Joker at number 10, Batman Forever and the original Batman at number 11 and 12. Those are the kind of performances that I think James Gunn would have perhaps wanted for this film, or even something closer to what Batman Begins did at $86.8 million adjusted, or what Green Lantern did at $82.6 million adjusted, but just not even close with Supergirl. And part of it may have to do with the audience reaction. We talk about cinema score a lot on this show. Supergirl got a B- cinema score. That puts it with Superman 3 as far as one of the lowest cinema scores ever received by a DC live-action film. It does come in ahead of the C+ that was received by Jonah Hex, Batman and Robin, and the original Supergirl movie back in 1984. It comes in ahead of the C that Superman 4, The Quest for Peace got, and the D that Joker Folie à Deux got. But again, I don't think those are the kind of movies that you want to have a measuring stick up against. It got a worse cinema score than Batman v Superman, which got a B. It got a worse cinema score than The Flash, which also got a B. Batman Returns got a B. That kind of surprises me. 6 other movies got a B. And then movies that got a B+ included Suicide Squad, Superman Returns, Wonder Woman 1984. When you look at the history of DC live-action films, they've made 12 movies in the A range versus 21 movies in the B range. Those movies in the A range are Superman from last year, Aquaman, Batman Forever, The Batman, Man of Steel, Steel, Batman Begins, they all got an A-. The Dark Knight, Wonder Woman, Batman 89, The Dark Knight Rises, and Shazam all got an A. And then Superman 2, the only live-action DC film that received an A+. And I think that probably has something to do with why DC struggles at the box office. When you look at the fact that the majority of their films that received cinema scores are in the B range, that to me says that they struggle with consistency, that they can deliver one movie that has great audience response, but that they struggle to follow that up with another movie that does the same thing, and that could cause people to fall off over time. And we've seen these cycles of DC having something and having to reboot it, restart it, and then do it once again. It happened with the original Batman movies after Batman and Robin, and having to recycle with Batman Begins. Of course, you have the DCEU and the DCU, and the false starts with Green Lantern. Consistency has been a struggle for DC for many years, not just with Supergirl and the DCU, but going back to their early days of trying to build a franchise. But let's talk a little bit more specifically about Supergirl and some of the narratives, of course, that are starting to emerge around the film's performance. There's already been some questioning on what's going to happen with the DCU now. This is their second film, but it already is looking like it's going to be a major box office disappointment. In a quote to the New York Times, Peter Safran, who of course runs DC Studios along with James Gunn, said, quote, "While Supergirl didn't meet our box office expectations, it's just one component of a broader long-term strategy at DC Studios that we remain confident in." So kind of a non-statement statement. You can't really defend the performance of the movie, so I guess he said what he could say. But there was another quote in that story, which came from David Gross, who apparently is a box office analyst and consultant. When they asked him what happened with this movie, he said, quote, "Audiences turned on female superheroes during the pandemic, and Supergirl is opening in the same cold environment." And that to me is a little bit too easy of an explanation of what happened here. Now, I think that it is definitely undeniable that there were some headwinds that were faced by Supergirl. There were, from what I've seen, clips I've seen, etc., news coverage, there was an entire cable news channel that lined itself very vehemently against Supergirl and did for a while. And I don't think you can deny either that there are movies, and especially movies that star female superheroes, that kind of become political footballs. They're bludgeons, they're cudgels, and they are used for any number of reasons. And I'm sure that probably does have some detrimental impacts, but I don't think you can chalk Supergirl's performance up specifically to something like audiences turned on female superheroes during the pandemic, because first of all, we've had a few that were successes. I mean, when you go look at Black Panther, Wakanda Forever, which had Shuri as the lead hero, that movie did $850+ million worldwide. It made over, I think, $450 million domestically back in 2022. Yes, you had Wonder Woman 1984. That was a day and date streaming release in 2020, December 2020. So theatrical was never really in the playbook for that film. Even a movie like Black Widow was a day and date streaming release, and it still did about $180 million domestically. So the early part of the pandemic, I think it showed that there were still audience members that were willing to go see a superhero film with a female superhero. And really post Black Panther, Wakanda Forever, there have only been 3 superhero movies, DC Marvel movies, that were led by female characters. Not just a female character as part of the ensemble, but were led by female superheroes. You've got the Marvels, you've got Madam Web, and you've got Supergirl. The Marvels was kind of like Supergirl. It had middling reviews. The critics weren't crazy about it. So it wasn't just audiences that weren't nuts about that film. Critics also didn't particularly like it either. They didn't hate it, but they didn't love it. Then you have Madam Web, which was like a generationally bad movie, like 10% on Rotten Tomatoes. So is it really such a surprise that it didn't perform well? And then you had Supergirl, which is a bit like the Marvels. Critics didn't love it. They didn't hate it. Most of the reviews were in the middle. It's hovering around that 57, 58% on Rotten Tomatoes. And again, it's not just about critics. Audiences, paying customers that went to see it, not people that didn't go because it had a female superhero, but people who went and bought their tickets were very much the same on it. A B- cinema score is not great. And you look at some of the movies that did worse than, and you can say, well, it's not a worse movie than Catwoman. It's not a worse movie than Green Lantern. And personally, I agree. I didn't like the film that much, but I don't think it's as bad as some of the other movies that maybe had a better cinema score. But I think when you look at the fact that it got that B- score, that draws my attention to things like marketing, because as we talk about, cinema score is a measure of expectation almost more than anything else. And so the people that bought a ticket to Supergirl obviously did not have their expectations met. And a lot of that is on how the movie was sold, how it was marketed. It's not just about the narrative around that movie. Plus, I think it's also too simplistic to say that audiences turned on female superheroes during the pandemic, because there have been so many other superhero films with box office returns that were either, again, sort of middling or were box office bombs. You have movies like Black Adam that did okay, but not great. Shazam! Fury of the Gods was a bomb. The Flash was a big bomb. Blue Beetle didn't do well. Aquaman and the Lost Kingdom didn't do well. Of course, you had Joker Folie à Deux, which was an absolute bomb. Eternals was a disappointment. Morbius didn't do well. Also got terrible reviews. Ant-Man and the Wasp: Quantumania didn't meet expectations. Kraven the Hunter didn't do well. Captain America: Brave New World didn't do well. Thunderbolts did okay, but didn't really break out. So there have been superhero films. A lot of them, you can almost say the ones that are really successful are the exception to the rule at this point, that weren't led by female superheroes, that also didn't perform well post-pandemic. So I think when you look at how Supergirl did this weekend, everybody wants to attach a narrative to it that's something other than audiences just not liking it that much or not getting excited about it because of marketing reasons. They want to say it was because it had a female superhero in it, either because audiences are sick of female superheroes, and I see girl boss and all this stuff thrown around, or they've been turned against female superheroes by all of that stuff. But I think it's much more complicated than that. Yes, that stuff absolutely exists, and I think it sucks because a lot of it I don't think is very fair. But I also don't think you can chalk up a movie's failure to that. A lot of people taking credit for it, of course, but I think it's a much more complicated story than that. That's also just a little less boring, and it's harder to sell. And as we've been talking about this summer especially, narratives are what everybody is looking for. How can I sell this story and make it more appealing, my coverage more appealing? And that's why this show does okay, because I try not to go into the easy narrative unless it seems like that's actually the reason why. I don't think the fact that it was a female superhero was the dictating reason why Supergirl didn't perform well this weekend. I think that it was a factor among many factors, and I probably wouldn't put it in the top 3. Just to wrap up, there was also an interesting quote in Deadline. Speaking of narratives, they ran a pre-release article on Supergirl saying that the movie cost about $175 million before marketing, and that the break-even point for the film was at $315 million. And I've been talking a lot about the trades this summer and how they seem to kind of spin some of these movies in release. I talk about break-evens, of course, here on the show all the time, and I'm going to do Supergirl, the numbers as far as profitability in the box office window as it gets deeper into its release. But I just want to say, for the record, that number makes absolutely no sense to me. Even if you're not including marketing, even if you're just saying this $175 million budget, saying that it's going to break even at $315 million to me just does not make mathematical sense unless you're adding things in like, the $100 million promotional campaign that they got from the different partners and all of that stuff. Maybe it makes sense at that point, but from a box office only perspective, to say at the box office all it needs is that much to break even, that does not track. It seems to me like that's a reporter who got a quote from a source at DC and just wrote it without questioning it or thinking about it, because the break-even point, even if you don't include marketing, is higher than $315 million, and we will track it here on the show in the weeks to come. All right, so that's a lot of Supergirl talk. Let's wrap up some of the other movies in the top 10 real quick. We talked a bit about Obsession already. Just for the record, it is now the 5th highest grossing horror film of all time, unadjusted for inflation. It moved past the unadjusted gross of The Exorcist. And Backrooms, also now one of the 10 highest grossing domestic horror films of all time. So 2 of the top 10, both released within weeks of each other this summer. Obsession is also now the 4th highest grossing film ever released domestically that did not spend a weekend at number 1. It has moved past both Alvin and the Chipmunks movie, both the original and Squeakquel. And it's got My Big Fat Greek Wedding in its crosshairs as well. So it could be moving up as high as number 3. Who knows? Maybe even number 2 on this list. But number 3, I think, is pretty much locked. So Obsession continues to do well. And let's talk a little bit about Jackass. This was the 5th Jackass movie. And when you look at the history of Jackass theatrically, its high point was back in 2010 with Jackass 3D, which opened to $50.3 million. Jackass number 2 back in 2000 2006 opened to $29 million. And then the last Jackass movie, which I cannot believe that was 4 years ago, but Jackass Forever opened to $23.1 million. So there was a lot of audience goodwill 4 years ago for another Jackass movie. The original back in 2002 opened to 22.7, and you can see that Jackass Best and Last was way behind the other movies at $8.4 million. Again, I think part of it is because it was sort of a last-minute thing. I think it only got greenlit back in January. There weren't a whole lot of huge new stunts that were shot for it. That was kind of one of my disappointments with the movie, is they did not go as big as the other movies, and they marketed it as this isn't all new stuff. A lot of this is stuff that you've seen before. So I would be hard-pressed to call it a flop, but it's certainly not an impressive performance. Again, just sort of a nice way, I guess, to say goodbye to this crew. When you adjust for inflation, Jackass 3D opened to about $79 million back in 2010. And that movie, if you want to talk about going big, that movie definitely went big. Jackass number 2 opened to $49.8 million. The original Jackass opened to $45.4 million. So if you look at the adjusted for inflation numbers for the first 3 movies, it was one of those stair-step franchises where each one opened bigger than the one before. Jackass Forever opening to $27.3 million adjusted for inflation. So again, you can see that drop between the third movie and the fourth movie was pretty substantial. And then, of course, Jackass Best and Last, rounding out everything at number 5. So, of course, going into this weekend, which is July 4th here in the United States, we have Minions and Monsters, which is a Wednesday opener. So we'll be tracking the 5-day gross, we'll be tracking the weekend gross and see what it does. And that brings us to our Charts with Dan member poll question, which is very simple this week. You know, I take a lot of flack for the fact that I don't like the Minions. As a matter of fact, I hate the Minions. I hope that this latest movie is good. I hope that I don't once again walk out of a theater and just want to keep walking until I find the end of the earth so I can just walk off of it because I've had to sit through Minions again. But a lot of people seem to really like the Minions, and I've always thought that I was in the minority. So the question this week, it's a yes or no question. The Minions, yay or nay? Their existence, their vibe, the Minion Riz, whatever, however you want to judge that. Are you yay or nay on the Minions? Let's see just how in the minority I am. I promise I am not going to be tracking who said what. I can't even do that anyway. I'm not going to be offended if you say yay. I'm kind of expecting the answer to be yay, but I want to know where my audience stands, or at least the members here on the channel. Are you yay or nay on the Minions? We're going to talk about it next week when I'm sure I'll be covering the Minions being number 1 at the box office. All right, let's take a look now at all the markets outside of the U.S. and Canada and look at the top 5 films internationally. At number 1 was Toy Story 4, which dropped 41.4% in international markets to bring in another $89.1 million, so a smaller drop-off everywhere else than we saw here. Supergirl, man, if the domestic performance was bad, the international performance was disastrous. It only made $30 million total in all other markets where it was open. So WB wasn't able to sell the movie domestically, and it really wasn't able to sell the movie internationally. A good international performance would be this movie's only hope, and it is not going to get that. I think it's going to be worse news than what's going to happen here in the domestic market. So just all around bad news for Supergirl. Obsession added 25%, of course, to bring in $13.65 million internationally. In third place, Backrooms dropping less than 10% to bring in $11.4 million internationally. And then in fifth place, we had Crossing, which is a film from China. It brought in $11.1 million. It's a historical drama about Mao Zedong's crossing of the Qi Shui River with the Red Army. These Chinese historical movies often seen at the Chinese box office, especially in the summer. When you take those international numbers, you combine them with our domestic numbers, we get our top 10 movies worldwide. Toy Story 5, of course, still the number 1 movie in the world at $159.1 million. It's getting close to $600 million globally. We'll see if it can get to that $1 billion mark. Supergirl with a total of $68 million worldwide. Obsession made $23.45 million globally, just a 6.8% drop from last weekend. It's at $370 million around the world. Disclosure Day bringing in another $18.5 million. It's getting close to $200 million globally. Backrooms dropping 19.5% to bring in $15.7 million. It's at $330 million worldwide. At number 6 is Crossing from China at $11.1 million. At number 7, that's not a typo, Minions and Monsters. It actually opened in a few international markets this past weekend, so they got to see the movie before we did here in the United States. It brought in a total of $10.3 million, which of course we'll see a big increase next week when it hits theaters around most of the rest of the world. But getting an early drop on the top 10 worldwide. Jackass Best and Last opened at $10.3 million globally. At number 9 is a film from India called Welcome to the Jungle, which made $9.5 million. It is a Hindi language semi-remake of Tropic Thunder. It's got the same premise, and it is the third in the Welcome series of films. And at number 10, we have Michael, which brought in another $9.1 million, and is trying to moonwalk to $1 billion. $977 million. Is there enough left in the tank to get over that $1 billion mark? We're going to see. It's going to be pretty close. These are the top worldwide weekends this year. Again, not opening weekends, but total weekend grosses. Last week, we talked about the fact that the Super Mario Galaxy movie just barely had a bigger opening weekend than Toy Story 5, $314 million to $311 million. But Toy Story 5 had a bigger second weekend than the Super Mario Galaxy movie. It made $159.1 million, which is good enough for the 6th best performance for any film this year. Super Mario Galaxy's second weekend was the 8th best performance for any movie this year at $151.6 million. Like we saw domestically, both Toy Story and Super Mario now the only movies with 2 top performing weekends on the board worldwide this year. The Devil Wears Prada 2, Michael, and Avatar Fire and Ash have performances that allow them to round out the top 5. And looking at Pixar as far as worldwide gross, Toy Story 5 is now the 13th highest grossing Pixar film ever worldwide. It's moved past movies like Monsters, Inc., Brave, WALL-E, and Cars 2. It's getting close to movies like Ratatouille and The Incredibles, and then it's a bit more of a jump before it gets into Up, Monsters University, and Coco range to break into the top 10, and we'll see how it does over the next week or so. Let's take a look now at what I call some of our specialty charts, and we'll start with the top per theater averages for the weekend. And the top performing movie was a movie that I saw at Sundance and that I really enjoyed. It's going to be entering wide release in a couple of weeks. I think it's July 10th when it hits wide release. It's The Invite, starring Seth Rogen, Olivia Wilde, Penelope Cruz, and Edward Norton. Olivia Wilde also directed the film. It was a big hit at Sundance. It opened in 7 theaters and made $54,000 per theater. So it expands to some more theaters next weekend and then wide release the weekend after. So keep a lookout for it. I really like the movie. I'm actually looking forward to seeing it again. In second place, we had Toy Story 5 in its second weekend, which brought in $15,819 per theater in each of its 4,425 theaters. Supergirl brought in just over $10,000 per theater in each of its 3,602 theaters. And I'm sure theater owners are happy to see that money in their cash registers, because it doesn't really matter to them what the bottom line is as far as budget on Supergirl. They just like to see people walking in the doors. Romaria comes in 4th place in 2 theaters. It made $9,250 in each of those 2 theaters. It's a movie from Spanish writer-director Carla Simón that premiered at Cannes, and it's about a young woman who travels to her father's home to learn about her past. And in 5th place, we have Rose of Nevada, which was also in the top 5 last weekend. It expanded to 11 theaters, but still made $3,382 per theater. And for the second week in a row, we had one of the best per theater averages of the year, with The Invite coming in at the 4th best per theater average of 2026, wedging itself in between Maddie's Secret, which played in 1 theater last weekend, and Toy Story 5, which of course opened in a bunch more theaters last weekend. Toy Story 5 is in a distant 5th place. It made $36,000 per theater versus The Invite's $54,000 per theater. The Moment and Pillion still currently the best per theater averages of the year so far. These were the top films in limited release, which I define as fewer than 1,000 theaters. At number 1, we had Bleach, 1,000-Year Blood War, The Calamity, which was a top 10 movie. It made $3 million. Then we have Lucky Strike, which opened in 772 theaters. It's the latest film from director Rod Lurie, starring Scott Eastwood as an injured soldier behind German lines in World War II. In 3rd place is The Invite. Even though it was only in 7 theaters, it was able to make $379,000 total in those 7 theaters. Girls Like Girls in 511 theaters brought in $300,000, and Couture, playing in 235 theaters, brought in $135,000. Couture is a film from French writer-director Alice Winocour, starring Angelina Jolie as a director in Paris for Fashion Week, and it debuted at Toronto last year before getting a theatrical release this past weekend. So we are almost at the end of June. There are a couple of days left, but I wanted to go ahead and look at the market share for the year so far, as well as the cumulative box office so far in 2026. Let's look first at the market share, which is a percentage of tickets sold for each studio so far, and we start the clock on January 1st. And Disney had a big jump in market share, no surprise given the fact that Toy Story 5 performed so well. Currently, Disney films are responsible for 25.8% of all box office grosses in 2026 so far. That's an 8.2% increase from where we were at the end of May. So right now they are easily the top earning studio in Hollywood. Universal comes in second place with 19.4% of all tickets sold, and it's got Minions coming up this weekend. That's a 1.5% increase from May. Amazon is actually the third place studio so far this year at 11.9%, followed by Lionsgate at number 4, and the indie studios, which are the non-big studios, non-A24 studios, at number 9. Then we have A24 with 7.1%. And coming in last place, the bottom 3 studios are all big 5 studios. Paramount with 6.8% market share, Warner Brothers with 5.2% market share, and Sony at 4.2% market share. So basically 3 of the top 5 studios right now only accounting for about 16% of ticket sales total through the first half of 2026. I know that there are differences in strategy, release schedules, etc., but they're getting their butt whipped right now by A24 and Amazon and Lionsgate, and they better hope that their plans for the end of 2026 work out well, because currently it's looking pretty sad. Sony, of course, is going to get a big boost from Spider-Man Brand New Day at the end of July. Warner Brothers probably not going to get a big boost from Supergirl, and Paramount, I don't know. I don't know what's going on with Paramount. Does anyone really? And let's look at the cumulative domestic box office so far this year. So this is through almost the end of June, and we are at $4.66 billion. We are still having our best box office year since 2019. Right now, the box office in 2026 is up $538 million from the same point in 2025. And again, that's with a couple days left in the month. We were pacing $340 million ahead of the 2025 box office back in May. And that just kind of confirms what I suspected about June, which is that there was a lot of potential for us to improve on last year's June. And we did, to the tune of about $200 million. Now, July is going to be a little bit more difficult because last year there was Jurassic World Rebirth, Superman released in July last year, but we also have Minions, we've got Moana, we've got The Odyssey, we have day 1 of Spider-Man Brand New Day, which could actually be a sizable chunk of money. So I don't think that we have as much potential to outperform July this year as we did with June, but then going into August, we have basically the entire run of Spider-Man Brand New Day, which spills over into August, as well as any other holdovers. So I think we're still looking pretty good for the box office this summer and also for the year so far. All right, let's take a look at the 2026 annual domestic box office. Currently, the Super Mario Galaxy movie is the #1 grossing film of the year, but I don't think it will be for much longer. It's at $429.7 million. Michael is the second highest grossing film of the year at $370 million, followed by Project Hail Mary at $344 million. Toy Story 5 moves up 5 spots from last week. It's now the 4th highest grossing domestic film of the year at $297.2 million. Obsession's at number 5. The Devil Wears Prada 2 is down 2 spots to number 6. Backrooms is at 7. The Mandalorian and Grogu is at number 8. Hoppers is now the 9th highest grossing film of 2026. And Scream 7 sticks at number 10 for now, although it's not going to be on this list for very long. These are the highest grossing films at the worldwide box office so far this year. Currently, the Super Mario Galaxy movie, the only billion-dollar movie of the year, but Michael is closing in. It's only about $23 million away from crossing that $1 billion mark. Project Hail Mary and The Devil Wears Prada 2 are at numbers 3 and 4. The Chinese film Pegasus 3 is right now at number 5, but Toy Story 5 is charging up quick. It's up 3 spots from last week. It's the 6th highest grossing global film of the year at $585 million. Hoppers is down to number 7. Obsession's down to number 8. Backrooms jumps over The Mandalorian and Grogu, so it's now the 9th highest grossing global film of the year. And The Mandalorian and Grogu, the 10th highest grossing global grosser, and it will soon be knocked off of this chart by something. Who knows? Minions or The Odyssey or Moana, but it is not long for this top 10. So the Star Wars movie, the latest Star Wars movie, will not be a top 10 global grossing film of the year. So those are the box office numbers I have for you. Before we go, let's take a look at the latest in the world of streaming, and we'll start with the latest numbers from Netflix, which cover the week of June 15th through the 21st. New numbers will come out tomorrow. The number one program on Netflix for that week was Maternal Instinct, which is a true crime movie. It brought in 25.48 million views, which allowed it to beat I Will Find You in second place at just over 24 million views. I Will Find You is the latest Netflix limited series adaptation of a novel from writer Harlan Coben. He's had some successful adaptations on Netflix in the last few years, and this appears to be another one. In third place is Voicemails for Isabel, which is a rom-com starring Nick Robinson and Zoe Deutsch from writer-director Leah McKendrick. It brought in 17.54 million views. Then we have Teach You a Lesson at number 4, Office Romance at number 5. At number 6 is The Polygamist at 7.7 million views. The Polygamist is a miniseries from South Africa. At number 7 is Colors of Evil Black. At number 8 is Street Kings, which is a 2008 David Ayer film starring Keanu Reeves. Every week it seems like there's a movie that just pops up out of nowhere to be a top 10 Netflix movie, and that's what it is this week. At number 9 is Husbands in Action at 5.72 million views, which is a South Korean action comedy about a woman's husband and ex-husband teaming up to rescue her when she's kidnapped. And rounding out the top 10 is Swapped at 4.88 million views. And I Will Find You had the best debut for a new series so far in 2026 at just over 24 million views. That beats His and Hers, which debuted to 19.88 million views back on the first week of the year in early January. And it also comes in ahead of Michael Jackson, The Verdict, Reality Check, Inside America's Next Top Model, and Man on Fire. I Will Find You also had the third best weekly performance for any series on Netflix this year, behind the debut of Bridgerton Season 4, which brought in 39.72 million views back on the week of January 26th, as well as the second week of His and Hers on January 12th, which brought in 29.48 million views. It beats week 2 of Bridgerton Season 4 and week 5 of His and Hers, so kind of breaking up that January-February club there. Netflix hasn't had a lot of breakout hits this year, so I'm sure they're happy to see that show at least doing well for 1 week. These are the most watched Netflix programs in 2026. Right now, War Machine's at number 1 at 128.41 million views, with Swapped in second place at 125.29 million views. K-pop Demon Hunters actually moves up to third place with 120 million views, and I suspect that it's actually behind a lot of these movies and shows, but the thing is, K-pop Demon Hunters is never off of the charts. So every single week, I get ratings data for K-pop Demon Hunters because it's always a top 10 movie, whereas War Machine and Apex and The Rip, they move off the chart after 4 or 5 weeks. Netflix should be releasing their first batch of numbers for the first 6 months of the year in a week or two, so I will update this when I have those full numbers. Bridgerton Season 4 is at number 6, followed by His and Hers, Thrash, The Crash, and People We Meet on Vacation. Let's look now at the latest numbers from Nielsen. Now, these are domestic numbers only, and they're delayed by about a month because that's just how Nielsen likes to do their business. So this covers the week of May 25th through the 31st, and we will start with the most watched streaming movies. At number 1 was The Crash at 9.4 million hours watched, followed by GOAT at 8.65 million hours watched, and Jack Ryan Ghost War at just over 7 million hours watched. At number 4 is an old Samuel L. Jackson movie called Cleaner, at least according to my research. Again, just kind of a random older movie that pops up in the top 10. It brought in 7 million hours watched, followed by Ladies First at number 5, Remarkably Bright Creatures at number 6, Swapped at number 7, Sonic the Hedgehog 2 returning to the list at 4.28 million hours watched at number 8, Stolen Baby still in the top 10 at number 9 at just over 3 million hours watched, and Gabby's Dollhouse, the movie, debuting in the top 10 at 2.98 million hours watched. And these were the most watched streaming shows from May 25th through the 31st. At number 1 was The Burrows. The most watched show that week has now been canceled. 28.96 million hours watched. It is among the best performances of the year for any series, but not good enough for Netflix to pick up a season 2. Bluey in a distant second place, followed by Grey's Anatomy. Spider Noir on Amazon Prime Video debuts as the 4th most watched show overall at 14.18 million hours watched, so some good viewership numbers for that show. The Big Bang Theory is at number 5, followed by Dutton Ranch at number 6. The Four Seasons returned with its second season and brought in 12.65 million hours watched total across both seasons. The Boys is at number 8. Euphoria, as it wrapped up its series, returns to the top 10 at number 9 with 12.1 million hours watched. And SpongeBob SquarePants rounding out the top 10. That and Euphoria, very similar shows. Nothing different about those shows at all. And these were the top shows as far as watch time per available episode. So take the number of hours watched divided by the number of episodes you can watch. That's how you get this number. And The Burrows leads the way here too. 3.62 million hours of watch time in its first full week of release. But again, not good enough for that second season pickup. Dutton Ranch right behind it, 3.26 million hours per episode with just 4 episodes available. Spider Noir averaged 1.77 million hours of watch time per episode for each of its 8 episodes. Off Campus also doing well by this metric with 1.48 million hours of watch time per episode. Nemesis also above a million at 1.32 million hours per episode. Then we have Worst Ex Ever at number 6, The Four Seasons at number 7. Marshall's bringing in 669,000 hours per episode. The Testaments, which is the spinoff series of The Handmaid's Tale, is at number 9 at 628,000 hours per episode. And Euphoria rounding out the top 10 at just over 500,000 hours watched per episode. And those are all the numbers I have for you this week. Before we check out, though, I just want to take a look at some things that might interest you, both in theaters and at home this upcoming week. First of all, tomorrow on Tuesday, The Devil Wears Prada 2 hits premium video on demand. You can also buy it, so you can watch it at home if you missed it in theaters. There have also been some reports I've seen, several articles saying that Obsession is confirmed to be released digitally on Tuesday. However, I think those articles are assuming that Focus is going to put it out digitally after 45 days, which they are part of Universal. That's what Universal traditionally does. However, I could find no official announcement that Obsession is actually coming out on Tuesday. So what I will say is that it may or may not. If Universal holds to its pattern, then it will. But again, I've seen nothing from them saying it's actually going to happen. I think it would be premature at this point. But there are several articles saying absolutely confirmed for Tuesday. I cannot independently verify that. On Wednesday, as I mentioned, Minions and Monsters will be hitting theaters around the country. And also, in celebration of the July 4th weekend, Young Washington will be in theaters. It's a story about, well, young George Washington. It's being distributed by Angel Studios, so they're trying to kind of replicate that Sound of Freedom performance from a few years ago. And it's from John Irwin, who's the director of movies like I Can Only Imagine and Jesus Revolution. If you want to watch a new movie at home, Enola Holmes 3 will be debuting on Netflix this Wednesday, the third movie in Millie Bobby Brown's Sherlock Holmes adjacent series. And if you're looking for a new series to watch on Amazon Prime Video, Elle debuts on Wednesday. It's a Legally Blonde prequel series featuring a young Elle Woods in high school. Also debuting on Wednesday, X-Men 97 Season 2 on Disney+. You can stream the first 3 episodes of the show's second season. I did a spoiler-free review of the first 5 episodes I was able to watch. I really liked it. I think it's as good as the first season. So you can watch the first 3 episodes on Wednesday, and then weekly releases will follow that. On Thursday, you can catch Ready or Not 2 on Hulu, and on Friday, you can catch Lee Cronin's The Mummy on HBO Max. So a couple of 2026 releases for you to catch up on if you want over this holiday weekend. And that's all for this week. As I mentioned, tomorrow you should have my review of Minions and Monsters. On Wednesday, I'm going to try to put out my annual list of the best movies of 2026 so far, since we will, believe it or not, be halfway through the year. I'm in the process of getting that down to 10 movies. I think I'm also going to try to squeeze out a live show on Wednesday, but it's going to be a short one because I want to make sure I wrap up before Team USA plays. I will absolutely be watching that, as I've enjoyed watching a lot of the World Cup this year. And even going into the holiday weekend, I have a few ideas for something I might drop, including some ideas of what I might do if I ran DC Studios. So that's something that's on the back burner. I'm not guaranteeing it'll be ready for this weekend, but it's an intriguing possibility. Plus, you never know what else is going to happen here. The movies in the world of entertainment are unpredictable, so stay tuned as always. The best way to know what I'm up to is to hit that subscribe button, hit the bell so you're notified when I upload a new video. But most of all, thank you for watching this video. Until next time, stay safe, and I'll see you then. Bye.